Welcome everybody to Cubicle Lift. We have another episode. I'm Josh Rivedal. I think we're on episode 13. My stupendous co-host Efrem Epstein. I'm excited. We have a very special episode. Of course, we're talking about mental health in the workplace as always, but how it transcends and how it interweaves with several of our guests here who have also happened to serve in the armed forces in the United States. And we are so very grateful for their service and just really interested and really curious about how all of these topics crisscross. I happen to have not served, but I am the grandson of a man who served in the Royal Canadian Air Force, the US Air Force, and the Royal Air Force as a first lieutenant and ran bombing missions in the Second World War. And so I'm very proud of his service. And I'm also, my story starts there. I mean, he, as you know, my story, and I'm not going to go too deep into it, but my father died by suicide. My grandfather died by suicide. And that gentleman was Josh Rivedal, and that's who I'm speaking about. And so my story starts there. And you know that I've struggled with mental health challenges in the past, and I'm working really hard to prevent them in my life and to prevent them in others' lives. And so that's why I do this work. And so I'm here, and so I feel it's really full circle. And so my heart is really full, and I'm just endlessly grateful. And so that, I think, is enough to be said. I'm also with the I'm Possible Project. I do talks and different things around mental health and suicide prevention. You know who I am and how to find me. Let's kick it to stupendous Efrem Epstein, and we'll get our guests introduced as well.
Yeah, stupendous. Very, very quickly. I'm very excited about this episode. Like Josh, I cannot claim to have made the sacrifices or given back in the way that our three guests have, because I have not served firsthand. Like Josh, I am also the proud grandson of a veteran. My beloved maternal grandfather, Morris Geller, did serve in World War II. And one of the things that I inherited from him were some of his military uniforms. So I'm keeping this in mind and nearby today. And, today is not really about me. It's about our guests, and really love that we're talking about mental health and mental health workplaces always, but really specifically, what does it mean for veterans? And Bill's been here before, and so excited to welcome Lindsay and Brian, and thank you all. And why don't we start off with Lindsay, say hello, talk a little bit about your journey, and then we'll hear from Brian, and welcome Bill back.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Church. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the executive director and co-founder of Minority Veterans of America. Our organization works to create belonging and advance equity for minority veterans. So we work predominantly with women, people of color, LGBTQ folks, and religious and non-religious minorities. I have known Bill for many, many years at this point. We both started at the University of Washington, where we both did a lot of work with student veterans. And so my journey as a Navy veteran, I served in international intel, I got out, really struggled with my own mental health. I've had several bouts with suicidal ideations, depression, post-traumatic stress, anxiety, the veteran trifecta. So it's I've struggled with many mental health challenges of my own, and done a lot of work on suicide prevention and legislation and advocacy work to address the overall veteran suicide epidemic. So that's me. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Lindsay. Appreciate you for who you are. I think we're kicking it to Mr. Brian Shipman next.
Hey everyone, I'm Brian Shipman. I am I both my grandfather served in the Army in World War II. My father was in the Army, was drafted at the end of the Korean War. With a name like Shipman, I figured I needed to be in the Navy, so I joined. I went to ROTC at Illinois, was midshipman, shipman for 5 years, and then I just retired 2 years ago, June 1st, after 30 years as a Navy career. Had command of a destroyer squadron, spent about half my time in San Diego, had 15 years of sea duty on the counter, made lots of deployments, really enjoyed my career. And now that I'm out, my real full-time job is that I stay at home and I take care. I have a disabled adult daughter, and I'm technically I'm an employee of the state of Oregon as a personal service worker, and I take care of her full time. And then I got, in a year ago, a buddy of mine, we were commanding officers together. he had a coffee company startup and asked me to join him because he saw some of the Navy history posts that I used to put on my Facebook page and still do. So for the coffee company, I write history posts and do some outreach on Facebook to people. And that's how I'm living life. Moved up here to Portland after I retired.
Amazing, Brian. Really fascinating. Thank you. And then
Brian,
Bill
do
Kirst.
you want to share the name of your coffee company?
Old Salt Coffee Company.
Love it. It's a great name. And then we have Bill Kirst, who is back for the second time. Well, back for the first time, but second time guest. Glad to have you back. Hey, Bill.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, F. Great to see you, Lindsay. Great to meet you, Brian. Yeah, so great to return to the podcast. I'm also an ROTC grad. Got out of the Army in 2014 as a captain in the reserves. Both parents were Navy officers during Vietnam. My brother was also in the Army. My grandfather was in the Navy, served with the Marines on Mount Suribachi and Iwo Jima. So come from a long line of veterans. And as Lindsay mentioned, I had the privilege and honor of calling myself a mentor to this amazing leader. And we did get to do some incredible work in Seattle at the University of Washington, working with student veterans. And it's been my honor and pleasure to get to support Lindsay in growing this incredible organization, Minority Veterans of America. I'm wearing my t-shirt, Lindsay. You can see that.
I love that throwback edition. I love it.
The throwback is an old one. Yeah.
The original.
Like the original. And as you know, Josh and F, like I've talked a lot about the importance of mental health in the workplace and the unique intersectionality that is for veterans in the workplace and frankly, veterans in society. So I'm honored to be here talking about all the journeys. There's just a few here on this podcast today, but it's such important work. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you, Bill. So let's just dig in, kick off with some questions. We at Cubicle Lift really like to look at mental health from so many angles. It's holistic. There's, we're complex people and we have complex hats and we just do a lot as people and we don't want to be siloed. But in this case, we have three veterans on. We curated and cultivated this episode for a purpose. And so we want to really tap into their expertise and their lived expertise and their general expertise. And so I'm deeply curious, we're deeply curious, like what issues related to mental health do you believe specifically apply to those who are served, if at all, right? I mean, Lindsay, you kind of said trifecta. And so if you have more to say on that or anyone really, like let's dive in because if we know the issues, maybe we can help solve some of those issues together.
If you are okay, I'll jump in and get us kicked off. So I think first and foremost, it's important to understand that military service, no matter who you are, is inherently traumatic. You literally join an institution that says, I'm going to break you down and build you back to be exactly what I need you to be. And I think that's really important to understanding how reintegration works. And so when you look at a veteran's journey, we are institutionalized into one of the largest institutions in the entire world. And our whole job is to follow orders. So when we go to leave the workplace or leave our workplace, which is our entire world, like you no longer have that where you're going to live, what you're going to eat, what your next job is going to be, where you're going to be stationed in the world. That's not inherently a part of your journey anymore. So when you get back, it's really challenging to really holistically understand what you're going to do in civilian society. And so that re-entry part is the next traumatic part of your journey. And so I kind of, the leaving the military is like being walked to the gate and being told good luck. And so you see, even in the veteran community, like the number of suicides that happen daily for veterans started at 22 and is now down to 17, still disproportionately higher than the rest of the civilian population. So suicide is a huge part of our community, as is mental health challenges, and then everything else that goes with it. So not only are you mentally different, like you're very much like changed every part of your DNA, your physical health has also struggled. I know I left the service with medical retirement. I left it with fewer ribs than I went in, and like extra metal rods, like random things that don't happen to people that don't serve in the military. And so navigating the VA, navigating how you're going to get your medical care, how you're going to get your mental health care in an institution that's the second largest institution in the world. So, you talk about workplace mental health, which is really important, but mental health in the workplace is usually a result of what's happening in your personal life. And so when you think about like whether or not you're able to access care, or whether or not you're able to access mental health care, all of this is a part of your regular journey in your workplace, but most people don't understand what you're going through. You're going through it alone. If you add minority status to this, this gets even harder. So minorities face unique challenges in the military. So racial, ethnic discrimination and bias, even when you look at the institution, like the struggles with white supremacy, those are all inherent today. Not just like looking at the history, we're actually talking about today's military. And so for most racial ethnic minorities, they can, I think it's like 75% or something like that, have seen or been part of a racial discrimination instance in their service. And so you take that for LGBTQ folks, you actually see in modern history, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was just repealed 10 years ago. The trans ban was repealed in January. Trans people couldn't serve in the military, and yet 1 in 5 trans people will serve in the military. And so tell me, like, when you think about what types of discrimination, like hiding yourself, I still attribute my first divorce to the fact that I served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, wasn't able to talk about who I was, wasn't able to share that journey. And so when I left, I got married and I didn't know how to be a spouse to my partner. And so that became a part of my journey as well, but I didn't understand it. I was literally still living with the ramifications stuck in a shell that I hadn't quite broken open yet. So really that hardship of really just trying to figure out who you are, you're doing this at the same time you're trying to find a career. Then you add military sexual trauma, domestic violence, eating disorders. All of these things are what military service members, particularly minority service members, are disproportionately likely to experience in their service and in their veteran identity.
A lot of great stuff there. One thing that really struck me that you just said is that, you know, often, and this should be obvious, but sometimes it isn't, is that you said a lot of the mental health struggles in the workplace are based on things that are going on outside the workplace, but just your experience in the workplace. And I really also got the fact that you're talking about the things that you're going through, things that often one of the challenges that people, your coworkers, didn't. And even when they're trying to be supportive, even when they're maybe heralding you for your service, you're still an other to them. And I know part of my journey is that some things that I found toughest is at times when I felt othered, even when people weren't intentionally trying to hurt me in that regard.
I mean, I think that's really important. And like, just, you know, I was a student first when I first got out. And I remember the first 2 years, I didn't talk to another student veteran or another student in general. I didn't make any friends, because I was still other. Like, I felt like that whirling, like you're in the movie standing in the middle and like everybody's whirling around you. And like, you don't know who you are, who they are. You just, you know, like you're passing, ships passing in the night. But, you know, like when you are, even, you know, you talk a little bit about like when you're being heralded for your service, right? Like there's nothing, I think, for most veterans that we hate more than being told thank you for your service, because it's become a passive, like, nicety. It's like asking somebody how you're doing without actually caring how they're doing. And so I think it's really important for especially civilian society to understand on Veterans Day is one of the most challenging days for veterans, because people will constantly tell you like, thank you for your service. And it's the hardest thing to sit with, because most of us literally didn't do it for the thanks. We did it because we believe in our country. We love the people of our country. We, you know, saw it as an opportunity to gain generational equity. We saw it as an opportunity to go to college, to get medical care, all of these things, not necessarily to be thanked by the American public for our service. I think it's more important, you know, like when people say, instead of saying thank you for your service, support the organizations that support us, you know, like do something that's deeper, more meaningful, and holds more reverence than saying thank you or heralding somebody for their veteran status. It's really uncomfortable.
I have something that comes to mind, and I would really love to hear from Brian and Bill if and when they're ready. You know, you said something about being passive, and that really struck me, because we do that. Like, we have, in a lot of ways, in a lot of sectors in life, we take on this passive thing, and it's like, did my good deed for today, have the karma. And I just remember some years back, maybe 7-8 years ago, Mental Health America out of New York City, the local chapter, was very active with their veterans in the New York City area. And they ran this program called The Stories We Carry. and it was this really beautiful thing, and it was this immersive thing between, it was to encourage civilian and veteran dialogue. And it kind of, the basis of it, I think, went back to old, ancient Greece, where warriors would come home and they would share their stories as a way to put some of everything, right? Like everything that you talked about, Lindsay, and I'm talking, minor, everything, right? Not just being active in combat, but everything, right? To put it on the whole population, so we shared that burden a little more equitably. So I think this is more of a I don't know how we solve this right now, but, and you kind of said it, right? To support the organizations that support us, right? But how can we, and I challenge our viewers, right? Like, how can we as civilians support in a more active way rather than a passive way our siblings who are in and out of military service? We owe that to ourselves and to them. And so I just put that out there, and hopefully we can maybe start making some change.
Yeah, I think I'd love Brian, your thoughts here too. I think Lindsay and I, we've talked a lot about the importance of storytelling, like you said, Josh, and we've had the benefit. There was an amazing summit that Lindsay and her team hosted a number of years ago here in Seattle, where she brought leaders together. They brought leaders together, and the storytelling that happened in that forum changed lives, saved lives. And I think when they have the opportunity to pull people together, make a space, and say it is a safe place to tell your story, whatever that story is, that's when I believe the real transformation starts to happen. And part of the reason that I focus my efforts in areas that I do is because I feel that this can't be a passive thing anymore. There are so many people that, as we talked about, if you look at the numbers of suicidality, suicidation, that is not something that can be passively prevented. People need active engagement. People need their voice heard. People need their experience felt. And it's also part of the reason that through, organizations that we've talked about before, like Johns Hopkins has the Center for Consciousness and Psychedelic Studies. They're doing federally backed grants in research with psychedelics and veterans specifically to help them, because some of these people have never felt a sense of healing or a sense of who they are, as you said, Lindsay, right? When we join an organization, it breaks us down to build us back up. By its inherent sense, we have lost who we are. And so when you look at some of the healing that has happened with the assistance of psychedelic research and studies of consciousness, it is the first time that some of these veterans are actually returning to their sense of self. And that is life-changing, and that is saving lives. So I encourage people to look at some of the studies that are done, the research that is done in this space. It is saving lives by the hour. And it's why I'm directing my resources and my time and my effort towards Johns Hopkins studies in this, and towards Minority Veterans of America, and towards organizations like Heroic Hearts that are doing psychedelic assisted, healing for veterans. There's been a lot I've studied in this space, and I've not seen as much results and impact as I've seen in that space. So I wanted to offer that as well.
Brian, you had a pretty big command. I kind of did a little digging prior to us jumping on. I saw some of what you said, and I was like, holy cow! And I have my ex-wife has her brothers are like I think a commander, and they're on some pretty big ships, but not to your level, to what you did. But I know how big that is, being leading in that space. What is that? Can I ask that? Like, what is that like to be a leader and then to see people going through, transitioning in and out? Like, I'm just so curious about your experience, if I may even ask that, and you can totally
No,
throw.
that's a good question. I was trying to find a good way to enter in with the ongoing discussion. Obviously, I'm aware of veteran suicide. I care about veteran suicide. I am not nearly as deeply involved with it as some of the others. And some of the things I'm hearing here, I'm taking some time to try to to bring it all in and work through it. I'm still in. Obviously, I work with a whole lot of people over the years, and I've kept in touch with several of them. And keeping on the topic of the veteran suicide, one in particular, a young man that worked for me. I still try to keep in touch with him. He got out of the Navy, and he'd actually started out as a Marine, went into SEAL training, washed out of SEALs, and then he came and worked for me on the ship. Good guy, did about 10 or 11 years, got out, and has really struggled since he got out. And I keep in touch with him. I think part of it, this is not saying that I'm a great guy. That's not the point of this. The point, I think that he has struggled with a lot of mental health issues. And I think there are times when he has never uttered the word suicide to me, but I think that probably it's not unreasonable to think that he has considered that option. In his particular, and this is one particular instance, I think he was someone that his identity really became being in the military. And when he got out, that sense of purpose and that regimented, here's what I'm doing today, here's what I've got to look forward to. And he didn't have that. He really struggled with setting up that own structure in his life. And what I did like in the last couple of times I've talked with him, he has found some other veterans like himself, two of whom he had served with. I think there's got to be that personal connection with someone who has that shared whatever it is that you're not having anymore. I like the thing about the place to tell the stories. I always joked that the reason you join the Navy is for the sea stories. That's why you join the Navy. We have the greatest stories in the world. It's one thing to tell the story, but to make sure that the receiver on the other end, can get through the acronyms and the isms and the way that we speak that those stories were formed. And I think that goes a long way to people when they initially get out and they struggle, is having someone that they can connect to at the personal level. Now, that's easy to say. That's a lot harder to actually have the plan to execute, because you can't. It's not like you can just give the order. It's like, hey, chief, every one of your sailors who gets out, I want you to tell me over the next year how many you talk to. It doesn't work that way. There has to be that human connection in there. Is that something that advocacy, that perhaps, again, I've been out 2.5 years, so I try not to critique too much of what's going on, but maybe that should be in part of the leadership curriculum for all of the services. Whereas as you go through the ranks, you go through the different levels of leadership schools. Part of that should be, hey, if you've identified someone who you think you have a connection with, and somebody you think might have a struggle, make a point to stay in touch with them after one or both of you leave the service, just to see how things are going. Because sometimes that phone call, that email, text, you never know how much good you're doing for someone like that. Open for thoughts on that.
No, Brian, thank you so much. And a lot of our conversations are about what are some of the negative things we've seen and how do we move away from them, but also a large part of our conversation is that what are some of the positive things that we can be replicating. I know in your case, a lot of your coworkers at Old Salt were veterans themselves, and I want to talk a little bit about, because one thing that I think is true, regardless of our use case, regardless of whether we were veterans is that we relate better to people that we share common stories with. Bill and I talked a little bit on the Hopkins alma mater episode, and when you share a common narrative, and so you share a common narrative with a lot of your coworkers at Old Salt, and I'm just curious, very, very briefly, can you maybe share just a quick anecdote about where you've seen that common thread that you both served, or that you and some of your coworkers have served, have maybe played a role in terms of helping, maybe lifting each other up on a day? Or if I'm basically suggesting something that didn't happen, feel free to say that as well too.
No, I do have a good sea story on that. Dave, who asked me to join the company, Dave and I were commanding officers together. He had a frigate. I had the destroyer. We deployed in 2008. We first met, I want to say in 1994. We were at Navy postgraduate school together, and over the years, we bumped into one another. We hadn't served, in the same command, but we kept in touch, and we were friends. Well, there were some tough times on that deployment, as there were with, any time during deployment. So we had actually set up, there were two other destroyers in the strike group, and we had our own. We set up on the classified email of something we called COPS, Commanding Officer Protection Society, and the four of us would email back and forth, saying, "Hey, the boss just raked me over the coals for doing this, this, and this today," and we'd kind of help each other out, keep an eye on one another. Dave, in particular, I won't speak for Dave, but he had one kind of embarrassing incident while we were deployed, and I think a couple of us helped him out there. He thought he might get relieved that day. We kind of told him, "Hey, take a step back, take a breath, give the boss a minute to think through this. We think you'll be okay." And sure enough, he went on, completed. He had a great tour as a commanding officer, but that camaraderie, because as the captain, it's not like there's a bunch of people on the ship you can go hang out with and coke and joke with. So you need to have your peer group and your support group, and I think that bleeds over to that's not unique. Everyone needs their support group, and that's someone they can talk to, that they can relate to, share the stories, air the problems or the grievances. I was always there you need to have someone that you can go talk to and say the things that no one else can hear. And they might be ugly. I mean, they might be nasty, but you go out, you air them, take that deep breath. 10, 15 minutes later, you're ready to go back to work and face the people you work with.
I'm just kind of going back to something that was said earlier that just kind of struck me, and it just had along the lines of you sort of talking to this young man who's been out, who did this 10, 11 years. There's this element of like mentorship that's so important, and just connection, right? And I mean, we just went on, just spoke about it again, but this mentor, or just having at least one strong connection, somebody who we can, really, really connect to, is such a barrier to suicide attempts. I don't know how much it's necessarily like a barrier to suicidal ideation, but it's certainly a huge barrier, and we need multiples, right? And so that storytelling piece, as we talked about, and that ability to share the pieces of us somewhere, that the ugly stuff too, right? Like the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we need that, whether that's therapy, whether that's a group, whether that's a mentor, whether that's a friend. And then something you said also, in terms of, and it kind of ties into what Lindsay had said, and just the trauma of transition, right? And there's always trauma in transition. Some level, there's trauma in transition of any kind, right? And so if we know this transition is coming, right, and we know it's traumatic, then there probably is some kind of advocacy piece that we can do to ease that transition. I have people in my life who aren't military, they're not in the military, but they need that structure too. And I realize that and recognize that when they don't have it, they don't do well, right? And so whatever that case may be, whether they need the structure, they don't, there's still going to be some trauma in that transition. So I don't know what that looks like, whether that's like one, part of your job, chief, E3, whatever, like, you mentor somebody on the outside, and that's part of your service. And that's part of leadership. I don't know what the right thing is. Lindsay, it sounds like you probably have something to say, but like, I think that's because there's always, and one of the things that comes back to me as well is when somebody, this transition, right? So when people go from the psychiatric ward to home, that transition is really high risk, right? That there's no structure, there's often a lack of support. And so there might be parallels from that structured environment in the military to, here you go, good luck, right? So
So I can speak a little to the advocacy part. We do a lot of work on Capitol Hill, and so there has been a very heightened focus on obviously mental health in general, because veterans struggle with many mental health disorders, and the advocacy that's being done around the transition is looking at two prongs. So one, looking at how do we make a more seamless transition to VA? So getting people their paperwork process, like starting up to 6 months before they get out, because that VA process can be really cumbersome and can be really challenging to get through. And it takes a while, and your financial stability is really on the line when it comes to separating. So there has been heightened focus on trying to make sure that people are connected with VA benefits, but also VA healthcare, to make sure that the mental health care component is factored in. The other part is that I've seen companies, and I'm thinking more like larger companies, right? So thinking about ERGs and the role of ERGs and resource groups. I think that with veterans specifically, like taking a trauma-informed approach to how those ERGs are formed, and not just saying like, we're out here to do a thing. We're actually here to make sure that you're okay. We're here to make, create community groups. We're here to have coffee chats. We're here to do these things that are going to create that connection. And so I think that's one avenue. But the other is I've also seen organizations that give their veterans and give people time to volunteer in organizations. And I think that the strongest, I struggled with mental health really badly. I was supposed to be in for 6 years. I got out in 4. The last 2 years of my service were absolute hell. So getting out, I was really challenged to find any type of connection. And so I didn't get connected to veterans groups until 2 years in. I tell you, those 2 years, I thank God for my mom. My mom served as well. So I lived with a veteran, which is literally probably what saved my life. Much like you all, I have come from a long family of veterans. And so I was fortunate that my mom understood the system. She has similar disabilities to my own, was able to help me get connected to VA care, was able to walk me to the door. And so that peer support, whether it's your parent or somebody else, that peer support is crucial to making sure that had I not had my mom, I think I would have probably struggled. And so, sorry. But that challenge, I spent all that time alone, and I needed that precipice to get me out into the community. And that was finally getting connected to other veterans. And Brian, you kind of pointed to, you need somebody that can sit with it. And I think that's 100% accurate. When Afghanistan fell, I put out a post on social media that said, I don't need a civilian population that's here to be armchair activists and armchair generals. I need a civilian population that can sit with the intense pain that we're sitting with right now. And that is what the call to duty for the civilian population is. It's to share that load. It's to feel that burden with us, because we carry it alone. And that's where the suicide risk really comes from, is carrying that burden and that pain all by yourself with no one around you that understands or gets it. And also the civilian population is mad that you're swearing, and you're like, wait, I'm actually talking about something that warrants all of these swear words. And so I think is really trying to understand where we're coming from and sitting with that pain with us and shouldering that burden. One of the things that we did on campus, it was called a calling home ceremony, and we did it in conjunction with the Indigenous Student Center on campus. And they educated us on Indigenous principles of reentry. And part of that was having the entire community come together to bring you home. And it was a whole burden of the entire community to help you reintegrate. And that, it's a whole of American population that's going to help the veteran community to really reintegrate.
Something, Lindsay, if I just very quickly, something that you said that really, you said a lot that really resonated with me, but something you said that really resonated with my non-military life is a lot of times the struggle is navigating a system. And part of the struggle that veterans have is that they just have a lot more systems to navigate than other people don't. And systems often are designed by people that they think they've designed something good, but there are holes in it that they don't realize until somebody tries to navigate them. And I will tell you that my journey where my tough moments have often come from trying to navigate a system that is supposed to work, and it's intended to work, and the person who designed it thought it was going to work, but it didn't. And I found I'm in a hole that no one can say to me anything but, oh, but the system's supposed to work. And just one small thing, actually, when I was at World Suicide Prevention Day at the UN in 2009, which is actually the day that that I got the idea to start my 501c3, one thing that resonated with me was I think it was Dr. Jerry Reed was talking specifically a different use case about mental health and the non-English speaker in America. And one of the things that they found is that a lot of struggles were coming from people, or a lot of calls to the suicide hotline were coming from people who didn't speak English. And what they were doing is they were trying to navigate systems like how they sign up for welfare, or how they get how they get certain things that they were entitled to, but they just couldn't because there was a language barrier. And one thing that they started doing is that when they got somebody that wasn't an English speaker on the phone, they started saying, "Do you want us to advocate for you? We can get on the phone with somebody that basically navigates. You're trying to set up for unemployment benefits or something else on those lines, and the problem is that you just don't speak English well enough. We can get on the phone with you with somebody who can just help to navigate that. And once they navigate that with them, I don't want to say it solved all the problems, but might have solved 80, 90% of their problems."
Yeah, I think what you're pointing to is really important. Like, you're literally, when you talk about veterans, you're talking about somebody who has transitioned from the largest institution in the world to the second largest institution in the world and to the largest integrated health network in the entire world. Do you think that that doesn't come with barriers? That comes with every roadblock you can imagine, including and up to how you were discharged, what your demographic information is, what you experienced in the military. They don't even transition records appropriately. I still have boxes of paper that I'm supposed to get turned into VA. There are over 3,000 to 4,000 pieces of paper in there. Absolutely not. And if it's on me to make sure that my records make it from one place to the other, because they don't have an electronic health record that talks to each other. And so you're talking about like loss of information, having gone through some of the worst trauma in your life and getting out to be even more traumatized. And then you have to go talk to somebody about it and figure out how you're going to get access to benefits. I have never been closer to suicide in my veteran life, as every time that VA has put one of the most intense roadblocks to things like getting medication, getting access to a doctor, like really small things that most people have, like, I mean, if you've had insurance problems, you get it, but like most people will never understand the VA complexity of like even moving from Seattle to Richmond, and they have a policy in place that cuts your medication by 25% for no reason. And you're navigating this, trying to figure out how is it that I'm going to get access to my care? And how do you show up to work like that?
Yeah, I think there's a very important piece of this, which you talked about, the transition and the role of, I'm calling it elders. You know, Lindsay, the way that you cited, there's so many powerful examples of the indigenous population and other populations that rely on the wisdom of the elders and the power of ritual to not let anyone slip through the cracks. And I think, you know, Josh, you mentioned this in the beginning, right? In some ways, we're looking back to the powers of ancient Greece, right? And the way that people took care of each other in communities. And what's old is new again. And look, we've learned a lot, but there's a lot of things that are just true to the human condition. And I don't care how many systems you put in place. I don't care how many databases you put in place. Nothing comes as close to the power of an elder and a power of somebody who's going to help you transition. Hands down. And they do the same thing. That's what they do in these mental health therapy sessions with the power of things like psychedelics and other medicine assisted. You don't do that alone. You do it facilitated. You do it with the power of someone to help you transition. We were not meant to be alone in this. So stop putting obstructions in the way that remind us we're alone.
I'm just reminded too that what am I trying to say here? We bring all of ourselves to every moment, and we bring all of ourselves to every space that we come into, right? And so those who are in contact with a veteran, you know, in the workplace, and this really goes for everybody, but we're speaking about veterans and specifically, I have this like, and maybe they're not working the way that you want, or maybe they're working at a higher rate. You know, there's some disconnect with communication, right? We don't know everyone's, I mean, just the complexities of everything you just talked about, Lindsay and Bill, like, but Lindsay, you know, and just the medication and like Richmond to Seattle or what have you, you know, there's unexpected challenges that you are not going to understand or ever have to face as a civilian person. And we all have our own set of circumstances and difficulties, but if you support the troops, then you know what? Shut the hell up and be kind and be empathetic. If you can't actually put yourself in someone's shoes, do your best, ask questions when appropriate, and support the troops by being supportive, by being kind, by being uh, a mentor, by being a friend, by supporting the organizations that support them, right? And so we have about 5 minutes, and I feel like I'm taking up too much time here, but we have about five, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I want to go Lindsay, Brian, Bill, and then Efrem, and then me. And just 30 seconds to a minute, just something maybe that you want us to take away from, a takeaway that you got from today, something you want people to know, just some wise words, because there's a lot of wise people in this virtual room right now. And own it, please, at least for this moment, and share with us and be our elder for a moment, if you wouldn't mind.
I think a lot of the stuff that we've talked about today is really important, but I think, there's a overall narrative that patriotism looks a certain way and patriotism wears a uniform, but veterans are better, like just people. We are people that have gone through a lot. And I think, this is a human condition, like this is all about showing up for one another as community. And that that supersedes veteran identities, that supersedes civilian identities. That's just about being a good human. And so I think when we look at workplaces, it's, capitalism is capitalism, and it really doesn't allow for the nuance of the human condition to be a part of your workplace. And so, one of the hardest things is changing your expectations for each person and meeting them where they are. And I think showing up as a friend or showing up as a colleague and just being there, even when it's hard, even when it looks different, even when that person, it looks like they're struggling or just not getting whatever it is that they need to get done, there's probably something going on. I've never met a veteran that was like not producing and wasn't also carrying something really heavy. And so I think, one of the things that we talked about that I think is most important here is carry the load with us. It's heavy. It's really heavy. It's really painful. We've been through a lot, even when we don't talk about it, even if you don't think you've been through a lot, veterans, we've been through a lot. It's the longer you've served, the more you've been through. And I think just looking at each other as human beings, being compassionate, showing up, helping people get connected when they're in trauma, when they need things, like showing up and being that civilian counterpart. Like I know my wife makes those phone calls sometimes when I can't, because sometimes I am literally driven to the edge when it comes to navigating the system that has really been harmful to me. And so there are times when I shut down and people are just like, why are you so mad? Well, I'm mad because this has been 7 years of battling the VA to do very basic things. And so allowing for that space for people to really show up for each other, even when it looks weird, calling the VA's patient advocate, because I can't make one more call to the operator where they hang up on me, because I will lose it. And so I think it's really just about little things here and really just showing up for each other and trying as hard as you can to sit in the pain and sit in the shit with us. Excuse my language. I know I'm not supposed to swear in the podcast, but that's the real thing. That's the real talk. Just sitting in the suck and being a part of that. That's the most patriotic thing that a civilian can do.
Thank you, Lindsay. That was profound. I mean that. Brian, please.
Tough to keep it at 30 seconds. Different perspective because I'm kind of the geezer in the room. I showed up for ROTC in fall of 1984, and it had really only been, there were guys there who still remembered where they weren't really welcome to wear uniforms on Thursdays because it might not go well, because, there was still the Vietnam stigma. And then after Gulf War I, that really solidified, hey, the military was really put on, veterans were held in a lot higher esteem. I'm oversimplifying. But also what happened in the early 90s is we downsized so much. There used to be a little Air Force base just north of Champaign where I went to college, Rantoul. And, you would see Air Force people come down on the weekends to meet college girls or whatever. And there were small little outposts of Army, Navy, Air Force, things around the country. All that stuff got shut down in the 90s. And there are a lot of citizens who have no direct connection with the military anymore. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, I'm just saying it is. And when they, and I always feel awkward when somebody says, thank you for your service, because I mean, I never picked up a gun and faced the enemy eye to eye, so I guess there's a little survivor's guilt there. I'm never quite sure how to answer that one, and it is a little awkward, but I think that there's some kind of too often, I think that I think veterans now are getting portrayed as broken toys who are ready to explode at any moment. I think a lot of civilians have that perception based on how some of the things are portrayed in the media. As veterans, yes, we look out for one another. I think it's also important to tell the story that, hey, we are citizen soldiers and the citizen comes first. We are no different than you. We just took a different path. We are mothers, fathers, immigrants, third generations, whatever it might be, but we have to be a reflection of the population that we serve. And as soon as we break that bond, that's when things are going to come off the rail and go really bad. So, I mean, that's one of the things that I kind of stick, that, you know, touches me on that. I really appreciated how, you know, for 30 years of my career, I mean, we had sailors, soldiers were held in pretty high esteem. And if we lose that connection with the people that we serve, and we allow the perception that every veteran is an angry, broken toy, you know, who's been broken in combat, whatever it is, I think we stand to lose a lot from the support of the people that we have served. So trying to keep that connection, obviously, when we taking this back to where we started on the thing of veteran suicide, if you have that connection with someone you've served with, I just kind of feel it as a incumbent task of mine that I need to keep in touch with people that I've connected with, and I enjoy the conversation, I enjoy the connection, and if I can still help, even as I'm not wearing the uniform anymore, that feels pretty good. But it's also good to be able to talk to the people who have not served and they have real questions about, you know, what's it really like in the Navy? And if you can tell that story, I think that goes a long way. Again, you're able to tell the story, and that helps you deal with where you've been and where you're at. And it also helps the public at large understand who we are.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate you. Bill.
Yeah, I'll close this out by, I was actually reading from a book that I love called The Book of Awakening by Mark Nepo. I think Lindsay knows this book. It's sort of a daily reading book. It's a companion for me. I think a lot of veterans find their way to different tools and companions. And so today's reading actually was called To the Core, which I thought was really interesting because it was what we're talking about, who we are to the core. And there was just a couple of lines that I read that really struck me, and I'd love to sort of close this out with this. Because the space between what we intend and what we do is often great, we keep beginning. Because the gap between what we feel and what we say is often surprising, we keep trying. Because the field between what we experience and what we understand is so vast, we keep growing. I ask for your support in letting us as we keep growing. Thanks for letting us share.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. F, you want final?
I really don't want to say much because I really just want to end with Bill's words. Per Lindsay, I will not say thank you for your service, but I will say, how can I help? And maybe if I had time for one quick thought, because this relates to something that Bill brought up earlier. I think one of my struggles and that I've had to navigate, and what solution has come down to, while staying true to who I am, not being afraid to step outside my comfort zone as things, and having somebody that came of age, being somebody that came of age in the just say no era. When I often hear the word psychedelics, I tend to get a little bit queasy, even though when I actually read that it's being studied by some of the most responsible and some of the brightest scientists in the world. And so per what Bill said, I'm going to attempt to step out of my comfort zone a little bit and basically read a little bit more. I've read a little bit about what Bill said, because me stepping out of my comfort zone, other people stepping out of those comfort zones will allow more people to get help. It doesn't have to be that micro issue, but I would say that's something that I would take out of this for myself or others there. Stay true to yourselves and straight to yourself, and obviously be informed, but don't be afraid to challenge yourself and step out of your comfort zone, because you may help yourself, you may help others as well.
Thank you, Efrem. Appreciate you. And I'll just 30 seconds, close it down. Two things. One, I love this thought, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's something along the lines of, if you don't say any other prayer but thank you, then that'll do, something along those lines. So just a massive thank you to our people here today. Service, no service, for being you, for sharing, for just showing up in the world and being of service, not just in the military, but to your fellows, to your people, to me, to us. And I'm of service, and F is of service. And so we share the load in different ways, and we need to continue to do that. And then the final thing is, let's find, in the uncomfortable and the icky and the suck, let's keep finding ways to grow and look inward. How can we do differently? What are we missing? What are we lacking on? And how can we continue? And what's going well also, because there are things that we're doing well also, and we need to honor that as well. And that's part of what we're doing here today, and what we do with Cubicle Lift. How can we grow? Where are the gaps? How do we move through them? And how do we bring our people along with us? So thank you so very much to our guests today. Thank you, Efrem. Beautiful co-host, and just thank you to everyone who's viewing. I'm Josh Rivedal for Cubicle Lift. We will see you next time. Thank you.